mic. Once I'm on this slide, I'll probably be camped out there for a while. You okay? Good morning. Good morning. We will get started here soon. We'll be in Judges chapter 8, starting at verse 22, the second part of Abimelech. But let's open with a word of prayer before we get started. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day that we can come together, look at your word, and worship you. See what you have for us from your word, that we'd be able to follow it and apply it in your life. Pray for Pastor as he brings the message later on, and for those who are involved with playing the piano and singing and scripture reading and ushering. Pray also for those who are down the hall working with the kids and the teens, that you'd bless that time to your use. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so last week we talked about kind of the rise of Abimelech, where Israel had again fallen. And I'm not sure what happened to the font there. That was larger before. It's gotten smaller, but that's okay. It's also on the handout. I don't have a new handout for this week. It's the same handout as last week, continue on with Abimelech. Though if you didn't get a copy, there are a few copies back by the offering box. So Israel has turned away from God again. They've prostituted themselves to Baal-berith. Abimelech has conspired against his brothers and has talked Shechem, the city of Shechem, into paying him so he could finance mercenaries, these reckless adventurers, these reckless, worthless mercenaries, as different translations describe them, to go and kill all of his brothers. They missed one. They missed the youngest brother, Jotham, but managed to kill the other 69. And after he kills them, he's made king over Shechem, and presumably we're going to see in verse 22 here, over Israel itself, with Shechem kind of being the center of his power, since they were the city that funded his rise to power and advanced his rise to power. And then last week we ended with looking at this fable that Jotham, the youngest brother of Abimelech, Gideon's youngest son, proclaims against Abimelech. And in this fable of the trees looking for a leader, there's kind of three indictments involving leadership, in that Abimelech's leadership is indicted as being this worthless thornbush bramble leadership that has taken over. So first, there's an indictment against Abimelech. Secondly, there's an indictment against those who were fit for leadership who didn't respond to that call. As the trees go to the olive tree, the fig tree, and the grapevine, and call each one of them, and each one of them is too busy doing something else to heed this call of leadership. So part of the reason why Abimelech is able to become leader is because there's this vacuum of leadership as far as those who are fit for leadership aren't stepping up, and those who aren't fit for leadership, Abimelech, are not just stepping up, but kind of forcing their way in. And then kind of the third indictment there, along with against Abimelech as far as bad leadership, and against those who are fit for leadership, who didn't take leadership, there's also an indictment against Israel here, in that they were so desperate for leadership that they didn't keep looking for a good leader. They settled on the worthless thornbush bramble leader. So there's an indictment against those who are so desperate for leadership that they go after somebody who's not fit for leadership, and like, you should lead us because, well, clearly you're a great leader because you were able to get funding to go kill your brothers. The mark of any good leader. Not at all the mark of a good leader. And so we left off with Jotham's fable. At the end of Jotham's fable, he basically tells them, look, if you think you've done well, rejoice in choosing Abimelech. But if you haven't, Abimelech and Shechem are going to destroy each other and take you down with it. Which brings us to Judges chapter 8, verse 22. Oh, and I should advance on here a little bit. We talked about geography as first, where we were at last time, and a little bit about Shechem, since Shechem is very much central to this. It's in a mountain pass strategically located on a major trade route, and is kind of bracketed to the north by Mount Ebal and to the south by Mount Gerizim. And Mount Gerizim is where Jotham proclaimed his fable to indict the city of Shechem, Abimelech, Israel, and with leadership. So just a reminder of where we are there. All right, so Judges 8, verse 22. After Abimelech had reigned over Israel 3 years, God sent a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. And the men of Shechem dealt treacherously with Abimelech. So here, interestingly, with the previous narratives, with the cycle of Israel sinning, Israel being oppressed to draw them back to God, and then God raising up a deliverer, at this point in the narrative, we would have had God's Spirit coming on the deliverer to enable them, whether it be Gideon or whether it be Ehud or whether it be Othniel. But here we see the opposite. Instead of God sending his spirit to enable the deliverer, God sends a spirit of ill will between Abimelech and the men of Shechem. So one of the kind of trademarks of this narrative, when we think about the book of Judges, is always asking the question, what's wrong with this picture? And what's wrong with the picture of this narrative of Abimelech is everything. Here, the oppressor is not external, it's homegrown. The oppressor, Abimelech, they've elected to be, not elected, but they've proclaimed to be king. So rather than being this outside oppressor, it's this internal oppressor. And I apologize, there's those of you who are confused. I just realized I said Judges 8, verse 22. It's Judges 9, verse 22. Judges 8, 22 is back with Gideon still. Sorry about that. So God sends this spirit of ill will. Now there's some Bible scholars who think, well, this is a demon that God sent. It's not a demon that God sent. He just sowed dissension between Abimelech and Shechem. This is not some sort of demonic evil spirit that God is using as an instrument here. God doesn't do that. So God sends an evil spirit, and Shechem, now keep in mind, Shechem is the city that helped bring Abimelech to power by giving him the 70 shekels so that he could hire his mercenaries, his army basically. So verse 24, that the crime done to the 70 sons of Jeroboam might be settled, and their blood be laid on Abimelech their brother who killed them, and on the men of Shechem who aided him in the killing of his brother. So it's explained here that Shechem's turning against him. This is God's plan for justice against Abimelech for the evil that he did in killing his brothers to come to power. And the men of Shechem set men in ambush against him on the tops of the mountains, and they robbed all who passed by them along that way, and it was told to Abimelech. Now this may seem a little bit weird. How is it that Shechem, setting up ambush to rob passerbys, is somehow hurting Abimelech? Because here they're not attacking Abimelech yet as he's coming by. They're attacking passerbys and robbing them. Well, Abimelech's the king. He gets tribute from people who are passing through this thoroughfare, this main route through the mountains between Mount Ebal and Mount Gerizim. Shechem has sent out people so that before the caravan gets to the point where Abimelech is getting his tribute to support his finances, they're robbing them first, so that by the time the travelers get to Abimelech's checkpoint, basically, they don't have any money for tribute, they don't have any goods, and they may even not even make it that far, as they may turn around and head back east of the Jordan because they've just been robbed. And so the men of Shechem here are setting up this ambush to hit Abimelech financially. And Abimelech finds out about this, not surprisingly. So verse 26, we have a new character introduced here, Gaal. And Gaal's name means dung beetle, which might seem a little bit, why would you name your kid that? There's a couple reasons why. One possibility is sometimes individuals' names are kind of changed in the Bible. We're going to see Zebul show up in a few minutes. He is the governor of Shechem. Zebul means noble. And if you think about Queen Jezebel, her name was likely Jezebul, for this noble woman who was queen. Her name recorded in the Bible was changed, though, by God and the scribes from Jezebul, which would be noble, to Jezebel, which means dung. Nobody is going to name their kid that. But this was where often names are changed in the Bible in order to emphasize something about the individual's character. In that case, Jezebel was this evil queen. She did not deserve the name Jezebul, noble. She deserved the name Jezebel. So that's one possibility, is that Gaal, since he is not a hero in this story, his name has been changed as far as the dung beetle. Though, in this case, it's more likely actually a favored name. Because the dung beetle was also known as Egyptian scarab beetle, that would have been sacred within Egyptian mythology. So Gaal is likely given this name of the Egyptian scarab beetle, which likely indicates he's probably not an Israelite. He's probably a Canaanite, or if he is an Israelite, he's an Israelite who's very Canaanized in that he's been given a pagan name. So now Gaal, the son of Ebed, came with his brothers and went over to Shechem, and the men of Shechem put their confidence in him. So at this point, Shechem, because of this evil spirit, or this spirit of ill that God has sent, Shechem has turned against Abimelech. Gaal comes along, and they're like, hey, let's put our confidence in this guy, the dung beetle or the scarab beetle, whichever. And so they went out. This would be the city of Shechem. It's the time of harvest. They went out into the fields, gathered grapes from the vineyards, and trod them and made wine and made merry. And they went into the house of their God and ate and drank and cursed Abimelech. Then Gaal, the son of Ebed, said, who is Abimelech and who is Shechem that we should serve him? Is he not the son of Jerubbaal, and is not Zebul his officer? Serve the men of Hamor, the father of Shechem. But why should we serve him? If only the people were under my authority, then I would remove Abimelech. And so he said to Abimelech, increase your army and come out. So Gaal has come to Shechem. Shechem's had this falling out with Abimelech. They've sent out their men to ambush and rob travelers so that they don't pay tribute to Abimelech. Gaal has come along. They've put their confidence in him for some reason. It's harvest time. They've made wine. They're partying. And Gaal starts to trash talk Abimelech and starts questioning, who is this Abimelech guy? He's kind of this half-breed Israelite, Canaanite. And his logic here is that Shechem should turn to him because evidently he is a descendant of Hamor and Shechem. Hamor being the individual who founded the city of Shechem, and Shechem being Hamor's son, who might have been named after the city, or the city may have been named after him. So Gaal is trying to build up his support base more by referring back to history of Shechem and saying, Abimelech came to you and convinced you that he should be your leader because he said you were his brother, because he has family in Shechem. Gaal is trying to break that family tie down by going to an older family tie of Shechem. We're in Judges chapter 9, verse 20. We just finished at verse 29, but I'm talking about verses 26 to 29 right now. So Gaal trash talks Abimelech and ends this by kind of challenging Abimelech to increase his army and come out. Now, Abimelech is not there, so he is not directly sending this to him. This is a empty, big words at a party where Gaul has had too much to drink, and he thinks he's pretty safe because Abimelech isn't in the city. But what he doesn't recognize is that Zebul, the governor of the city, is still true to Abimelech. And so in verse 30, we say that Zebul, the ruler of the city, heard the words of Gaul, the son of Ebed, and his anger was aroused. So he doesn't like the fact that Gaul is speaking poorly of Abimelech. And so he sends, in verse 31, he sends messengers to Abimelech secretly, saying, "Take note, Gaul, the son of Ebed, and his brothers have come to Shechem, and here they are fortifying the city against you. Now therefore, get up by night, you and the people who are with you, and lie in wait in the field. And it shall be as soon as the sun is up in the morning, that you shall rise early, rush upon the city, and when he and the people who are with him come out against you, you may then do to them as you find opportunity." So Zebul has gone and secretly informed Abimelech that Gaul is speaking badly of him, and suggests that Abimelech should set up this ambush now against Gaul and those in Shechem who are now following after Gaul. And something to kind of point out here is in a narrative like this, sometimes it's like, okay, who do you root for? Because often in like North American culture, we really like the good guy versus bad guy story and who do you root for type of thing. Well, in this case, clearly you don't root for Abimelech because he started his reign of terror by killing 69 of his brothers, and he wanted to kill the 70th to wipe out the rest of his family. So, and he's got these worthless mercenaries that are terrorizing. So he's not the hero. And so it might be that like, well, Gaul, he's taking the stand against him with the men of Shechem, but not really, because he's drawing his heritage back to not godly roots, but to the Canaanite roots of the city of Shechem. So clearly he's not. And then the Zebul, the busybody between them that is trying to start a war between Abimelech and Gaul, clearly not him either, nor the city of Shechem. And this is a narrative where what's wrong with this picture is there's nobody good here at this point. There's nobody that we want to set up and say, well, this is the hero here. Because there isn't. And sometimes we have to consider that, you know, in life or in politics or whatever, we might be looking at somebody who's like, well, this person's evil, and this person opposes them, so they must be the good guy. But sometimes we make a mistake in not recognizing that neither one of them are good and neither one of them are worth putting our trust or allegiance in. So verse 34, so Abimelech takes Gaul's advice, and all the people who are with him, they rise up by night, they lay in wait against Shechem in 4 companies. So they split up in 4 companies to surround Shechem. And when Gaul, the son of Ebed, went out and stood in the entrance to the city gate, Abimelech and the people who were with him rose from lying in wait. And when Gaul saw the people, he said to Zebul, "Look, people are coming down from the tops of the mountains." But Zebul said to him, "You see the shadows of the mountains as if they were men." So Zebul is kind of still pretending to be on Gaul's side. He knows exactly who these people are who are coming because he's the one who sent for Abimelech to set up this ambush. But he's wanting to buy some additional time for Abimelech to make it harder for Gaul and his men to be ready to fight Abimelech. And so he tries a ruse of saying, nope, it's early morning. You were up partying too late, Gaul. Your eyesight's not good now. Those aren't people coming down. That's just a shadow of the sun coming over the mountain. So Gaul speaks to him again. "See, people are coming down from the center of the land, and another company is coming from the diviner's terebinth tree." So Gaul, he's not sure, but he's like, wait a minute, no, there's more coming. He hasn't quite figured out that Zebul is not with him. And then Zebul says to him, "Where indeed is your mouth now, with which you said, 'Who is Abimelech, that we should serve him?' Are not these the people whom you despised? Go out, if you will, and fight with them now." So Zebul now returns the trash talk to Abimelech. He's like, "You spoke big at the party recently, saying that Abimelech should come out with his army. Look at that. Here they are. Here's your opportunity to show it. Go out and fight him." Now, typically in a situation like this, Gaul, being in a fortified city, would have mounted his defense from the advantage of the fortified city rather than losing that advantage by leaving. But he can't for a couple reasons. This has come by surprise, and very likely he isn't prepared to be in a city siege situation with enough provisions to survive that, because he hasn't seen this coming. Additionally, very clearly, Gaul is a bit of a proud individual, as he's initiated this by, at the drunken party, calling out and trash-talking Abimelech and saying how great he is. So Zebul is kind of prodding that pride and using that to give Abimelech an even more advantage, in that Gaul now is being driven by pride as he's running out into the field unprepared for this battle. Which again, we might be like, oh, well then Gaul's the bad guy, we should root for Abimelech here. But no, keep in mind, Abimelech is setting up this ambush because of his pride, because when he heard that he was being trash-talked by Gaul, he got angry about this and set up this ambush. So again, there's nobody good here so far. So Gaul went out, leading the men of Shechem, and fought with Abimelech. And Abimelech chased him, and he fled from him, and many fell wounded to the very entrance of the gate. And then Abimelech dwelt in Arumah, and Zebul drove out Gaul and his brothers so that they would not dwell in Shechem. So Gaul is defeated. Gaul is driven out of Shechem. Zebul is back in control of Shechem as this governor ally with Abimelech, or so he thinks. So you'd think at this point that the battle would be over because Abimelech has driven Gaul out, Abimelech's back in control, his minions are back in control of Shechem. But keep in mind, what's going on here is not really a battle between Abimelech and Gaul, and Abimelech and Shechem. This is being driven by God sending this evil spirit between them to destroy both Abimelech and Shechem and remove both of their wickedness and both of their wickedness influence on Israel. And so we see in verse 42, and it came about on the next day that the people went out into the field and they told Abimelech. So Abimelech is being told that the people of Shechem are going out to harvest. And so Abimelech took his people, divided them into 3 companies, and lay in wait in the field. And he looked, and there were the people coming out of the city, and he rose against them and attacked them. And then Abimelech and the company that was with him rushed forward, stood at the entrance of the gate of the city, and the other 2 companies rushed upon all who were in the fields and killed them. So Abimelech fought against the city all that day. He took the city, killed the people who were in it, and he demolished the city and sowed it with salt. So Abimelech at this point is so driven by anger, he is not happy with just winning back Shechem. He wants to destroy Shechem because of their perceived disloyalty to him. And not only that, he sets up these 3 companies to ambush the people when they're going out to harvest the fields. And his company goes to the city gate to block it. So the individuals who've gone out to do harvest, they realize they're being attacked. They go to run back to the city, and Abimelech's waiting there blocking the gate and kills them there while his other 2 companies surround them. Once they've killed the people who are out for harvest, they turn their attention on the city. They destroy the city, and not only do they destroy the city, it says they sowed it with salt. Now, whether that was he literally did that or that was figuratively, Sowing with salt was basically a way to make land infertile and worthless. So he wasn't just wanting to get rid of Shechem. He wanted to make sure that nobody else was going to be able to settle there for a long time to come because the land was no longer fertile. The land would no longer grow. The land would no longer be harvestable. And it's interesting because from an archaeological standpoint, Shechem has been found archaeologically, and Shechem was destroyed at about the time that it was believed that Abimelech would have been attacking it. And it's unlikely that it was rebuilt until Jeroboam's day, about 200 years later, when Jeroboam set up his northern kingdom there. Which would be consistent with the city not just being destroyed, not just being demolished, but sowed with salt to make it unfavorable for living. So Abimelech is just taking absolute vengeance on this city. So verse 46, now when all the men of the tower of Shechem had heard that, they entered the stronghold of the temple of the god Berith. So as part of the attack on this, there's a remnant of individuals who weren't out in the fields, who are still in the city. As the city is being ransacked and destroyed, they go to the stronghold, which is the temple to the Canaanite god Baal-berith. And so Abimelech in verse 47 finds out that all the men of the tower of Shechem were gathered together in one place. In 48, then Abimelech went up to Mount Zalmon. Now, it's not known for sure exactly where Mount Zalmon is. Some think it was probably Mount Ebal. Others think it was Mount Gerizim. Others think it's a smaller mountain hilltop close there to this city. But either way, he and the people who were with him. And Abimelech took an axe in his hand and cut down a bough from the trees and took it and laid it on his shoulder. And he said to the people who were with him, "What you have seen me do, make haste and do as I have done." So each of the people likewise cut down his own bough and followed Abimelech, put them against the stronghold, set the stronghold on fire before them, so that all the people of the tower of Shechem died, about 1,000 men and women. So as part of his destruction of the city, as he's getting closer and closer, these 1,000 people who are still in Shechem, still alive, both men and women, hide in this tower, which is part of the Baal-berith temple complex as the strongest building in the city. Right there, as we're talking about things that are wrong with this picture, there's something wrong with the picture when the strongest, most fortified place of the city is a temple to Baal-berith, the Canaanite god. Because at this point, Shechem, there's both Canaanites and Israelites living there. It's quite big, yes. Archaeological digs have found the foundation of this temple. It's about 70 foot by 86 foot and would have been a multi-story temple. It is one of the largest at this point, if not the largest, temples to Baal that have been found in the Promised Land at this point. And that had become kind of at this point the center of who Israel was following as this false king Abimelech. Now at this point it might be thinking, well, Abimelech's a good guy because he's destroying this temple of Baal. But he's not because of the other reasons. God is using them to destroy each other. But still, this is still an absolutely horrible event that this temple is being destroyed by Abimelech and others gathering up trees, boughs of branches, stacking them up around this and burning it down and killing the people who are in it by fire as they burn it down. Regardless of who's evil here, that is still a horrible picture of what is happening here. It's interesting that in this, there are kind of some parallels between Gideon and Abimelech. We talked about earlier in the book of Judges how that each generation has a responsibility to teach the next generation God's truths. And each new generation has the responsibility to apply and know those. And we see that Abimelech either wasn't taught those by Gideon or was taught them and didn't apply. But here there's some parallels that very clearly Abimelech learned things from Gideon, but none of them were good. Here, his ambush, he broke his company into 3 companies. That's kind of an echo back to what God had Gideon do against the Abimelechs. The 300 men with their torches and their trumpets were broken into 3 companies of 100 to surround the Midianites. Additionally, as Gideon was leading those 300 men, he says to them that they should follow him and that they should do as he does, which is to blow the trumpet and break the jar to expose the flame. Here we just saw Abimelech use almost the same words in saying to his followers, each one of you, do what I do, follow what I do, grab a bough, a tree branch, and come and set fire to it to burn this temple. It's kind of an echo back to where Gideon. Though in Gideon's case, that was God's plan, that was what God wanted him to do to deal with the Midianites. Here, Abimelech, it's his own plan. It's not God's plan. Well, sort of. Because keep in mind, Abimelech and Shechem are destroying each other because God sent an evil spirit to facilitate this. So even though Abimelech doesn't know it, he is kind of doing God's will here. It's just he's not right with God in the process. It's also kind of ironic here in how Abimelech was brought to power was he got money from the temple of Baal-berith to support his rise to power, and now he just burned that same temple down. I think he also doesn't recognize in his anger what he's doing. He just destroyed his support and his power base because Shechem was his support and his power base. So in verse 50, then Abimelech went to Thebes, which is a city close to Shechem. We don't really know why he did this, but evidently he just was on this tirade of destroying things at this point. It was like, why stop now? And he encamped against Thebes and took it. But there was a strong tower in the city, and all the men and women, all the people of the city fled there and shut themselves in. Then they went up to the top of the tower. So Abimelech came as far as the tower and fought against it. He drew near the door of the tower to burn it with fire. So this kind of repeating itself exactly what he did at Shechem. The people are in this tower. He's getting ready to burn it. He thinks victory is his, like at Shechem. But God and a certain woman have different plans. So in verse 53 we have, but a certain woman dropped an upper millstone on Abimelech's head and crushed his skull. Then he called quickly to a young man, his armor-bearer, and said to him, draw your sword and kill me, lest men say of me, a woman killed me. So his young man thrust him through, and he died. And when the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead, they departed, every man to his place. So ironically, we have here, after Abimelech has destroyed Shechem, he goes to Thebes. He thinks he's going to do the same thing. And very similar to God using Jael to end General Sisera, God uses this woman and her millstone to end Abimelech in his reign. So there's some parallels there back to the account of Deborah, where we had Jael using a household implement, a hammer and a tent peg, to end General Sisera. Now we have this unnamed woman who's up in the tower. She takes, what is her livelihood? An upper millstone. So the upper millstone would be a small stone that would be rolled on a larger stone to grind grain to make flour. It would weigh maybe 4 to 9 pounds. She's up in this tower. She sees her opportunity. She sees Abimelech. She sees what's coming as far as they're stacking up wood to burn the tower, just like they did in Shechem. She throws it, hits him on his head, crushes his head. And kind of the final footnote on Abimelech's pride is his concern at this point, as he is dying, is he does not want to be remembered as having been killed by a woman. He doesn't want to be dishonored like General Sisera was in this. And you think about it, that's really not the best thought to be having at your last moments. You just don't want to be dishonored as you're about to be killed by a woman. He's also missing the plot here. He's going to be dishonored here because of his entire life and what he did as far as his evil. How he died here isn't going to bring dishonor on him. The fact that he killed 69 of his 70 brothers, and it says that he killed them on one stone. There are some Bible scholars who think that was kind of a sacrificial stone that he lined them up and killed them on. There are others who think it's more likely that the one stone that was being referred to was the weapon that was used, and that he used a stone mace to crush their skulls. I think it's more likely the stone mace, because often we see kind of irony in Judges coming back. The fact that a woman throws something about the size of a stone mace, just without the handle, down on his head to bring justice for the evil that he had done seems very fitting. So, well, she may have had good aim. She may have had practice throwing things at people's heads. We don't know. But either way, though, what's also interesting here is that once Abimelech's dead, that ends it. It isn't that everybody else is killed. It's they see their leader killed, and the men of Israel saw that Abimelech was dead. They departed, every man to his place. I think in some case that's also a mark of what a poor leader Abimelech was. A good leader who is killed in battle, his men rally in his honor. Here they see this is a man who has no honor, and they recognize it's time to cut their losses and put an end to this and walk away. And they do. Another kind of parallel here with this account in Gideon is in chapter 8 with Gideon, where he starts to go bad. Gideon takes vengeance against two cities, Suffolk and Peniel. And in Peniel, they go to a tower, and Gideon destroys the tower and kills the men of Peniel. We see that Abimelech is doing the same thing, just ratcheted up to a much higher level of evil here, in vengefully attacking this. So one of the themes we see here is generational sin. As far as Gideon started hesitant, got on board with God, and did good, but then he started to slide back in chapter 8 and ended rather poorly. And that set up the next generation, Abimelech, his son, to follow in Gideon's footsteps, but to one-up his dad in terms of evilness. And that sort of generational sin is only stopped by yielding to God. Now here it wasn't because Abimelech yielded to God voluntarily. It was because he yielded to God when he got the message from God in the form of a millstone thrown by a woman hit on his head. And at that point, he's like, I don't want a woman to kill me. So he turns his armor bearer and says, you kill me. So he was kind of bringing his own punishment on himself and asking to be executed. Verse 56 and 57, kind of the ending here to Abimelech. Thus God repaid the wickedness of Abimelech, which he had done to his father by killing his 70 brothers. And all the evil of the men of Shechem God returned on their own heads. And on them came the curse of Jotham, the son of Jerubbaal. Something that's good in here is that now we see God's justice. Even with all this evil, even with Abimelech's evil against his brothers, Shechem's evil, the Israelites' evil in following Baal-berith, God brings justice here in destroying the temple of Baal-berith, destroying the evil emphasis of Shechem, destroying Abimelech and repaying them. God brings justice here. But there's also something a little bit sad here in that this is the first narrative where we don't have Israel having a period of peace. Gideon was the last narrative where we're going to see, after the oppressor is thrown down, the land having rest and peace. Here, the best they're going to get is justice against Abimelech and against Shechem. There is no peace. We also do not see anywhere in this account the individuals of Israel, the people of Shechem, the people of Thebes, crying out to God at any point. And we just said that here this is an example of generational sin getting worse, and the only way that ends is by yielding to God. We do not see a yielding to God here. We don't see a turning back to God. Instead, we just see God bringing justice on the evilest of the players and the Israelites departing and going home. It doesn't say they went home to praise God. It doesn't say they praised God and went home. We don't have, like we did in the narrative of Deborah and Barak, after Jael struck the blow with the tent peg to Sisera, we had this beautiful song of Deborah praising God and calling and reminding the Israelites. It doesn't end with that. And with this narrative, Abimelech's narrative is placed in parallel with Deborah's narrative. The entire book of Judges we talked about in the first couple weeks has this parallel structure where the central judge is Gideon. So as we're going back through, I'm going to take a few minutes as we go back through to kind of review back some parallels here. So Deborah and Barak are parallel to Abimelech's account or narrative. First, in terms of their positioning in the structure of the book. Gideon is the central point, and Gideon both has good and bad. The first half of the book is more good, the second half is more not good. So we have the structural position. The narrative of Deborah and Barak is before Gideon, Abimelech is after Gideon. We also see, to draw the reader to say these are really to be looked at in parallel, is both of them end with a woman using an unconventional weapon to end the oppressor's life with a blow to the head. That's an unusual event. We don't see that a lot in biblical narrative or any historical narrative. So that's intentionally there to draw the reader that these two are supposed to be looked at in parallel. We also have this structure of them. Deborah and Barak was a narrative and poetry, a song of praise. Abimelech, narrative and poetry, a fable of Jotham indicting Abimelech, the poor leadership, and the nation of Israel. Now, unfortunately here, the poetry in Deborah was this glorious poem worshiping God, whereas the one here is not so much worshiping God, but giving the curses that will happen if bad leadership isn't dealt with. In both of the accounts, there's no solo judge. With Othniel, with Ehud, with Gideon, there was this solo judge figure. In Deborah Barak, there was kind of this teamwork between Deborah Barak and Jael. Here, there is no deliverer except there is. Here, there's no human solo deliverer, which draws the attention of the reader to God is the king, God is the deliverer, God is the one that should be followed, but because he's not being followed, everything's falling apart and everything is wrong with the picture. There's some contrasts also with Deborah and Barak. The oppressor was external. Here the oppressor is internal with Abimelech, which is again that theme of things have gotten much worse as we've rounded the corner to the second half of the book of Judges. Also, we've talked about leadership with Deborah and Barak. We had hesitant leadership, but once Barak was encouraged by Deborah's good leadership, he stepped up and didn't need further. With Abimelech, we see no hesitancy in leadership from somebody who is not fit to lead. So there's this contrast of a breakdown in leadership on both sides. One is somebody who is called to lead, who is fit to lead, is hesitant. And the other, now it's got to the point where Abimelech is not called to lead, he's not fit to lead, but he's not at all hesitant. And that doesn't end well for him. It also really doesn't end that well for Israel. And one of the commentators that I've read in going through this book, he made the following comments, named Kenneth Way. God's people put themselves in grave danger when they become functionally like the world around them. And that's what we see with Abimelech. In Romans 12:2, Paul points out the same principle. One of the things in the Old Testament that we see is these very colorful, detailed narratives that illustrate succinct doctrine that's in the New Testament. In this case, Romans 12, verse 2, Paul says, "And do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God." And that is exactly not what Abimelech and Israel was doing. They were turning to Baal-berith. They were being conformed to the world around them. Their kingship was centered around Shechem with this huge temple to Baal-berith. They were being extremely conformed to Canaan, not to God. Oh, let's close in prayer. So I'm over time. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for this word that you've given us, and help us to apply it and help us to follow you and not be conformed to this world as Abimelech and his followers were. Pray that you'd bless the message in this morning service. In